Healthy boundaries equals taking responsibility for your own actions and emotions while not taking responsibility for the emotions and actions of others. So how good are you at setting boundaries for yourself and for your kids? Let's discuss how the different personality types of the MBTI, judging and perceiving, naturally deal with their boundaries. When it comes to boundaries, people with different preferences have very different perspectives on them. Judging and perceiving types are about our decision-making and how we like to structure our lives. Judging types usually value structure and organisation in their lives, and they like well-defined boundaries. They like to plan and have a clear idea of what's been given in any situation. They're more likely to follow established rules and routines, and when their boundaries are in place, judging types feel comfortable, and they're often reluctant to change these. They can become very strong around their chosen boundaries and sometimes too strong. Their desire to stick to their decisions can be unrealistic, unachievable, and often inflexible. This negates the benefits that boundaries hold. I have a friend whose teenage daughter snuck out at night without her mother knowing. Now, my friend's reaction was to ban her daughter from using her phone for 6 weeks. Really? Well, no, not really, because by the time they got to the first weekend, she'd already backed off that ban. The child had her phone back because it was unrealistic. Let's face it, basically an impossible boundary to put in place. Getting a child off their phone for a day is bad enough. Your boundaries should have some flexibility, as life changes constantly, and it's important to be talking to your child about what's appropriate for both of you, so that you both understand what these boundaries are looking like. Now, I'm a perceiving type and we love flexibility and adaptability, and I much prefer open-ended boundaries. I like to keep my options open, and we're quite spontaneous with our decision-making. Therefore, we can find reasonable limits, hard to keep in parenting relationships and life in general. This might seem relaxed and easygoing, but actually, it's really stressful. When my children were in their teens, my way of combating something that's not a natural strength for me was to utilise other people's strengths to help me hold my boundaries. Now, one of Cassie's best friend's parents were both judging types, fair, reasonable, and took no shit. Her father and I had a deal that we would take it in turn to call parents for any party the kids attended. This is between the ages of 14 to 16, and we would ask the parents if they were supplying alcohol and if a parent would be in attendance. Knowledge of his expectations and support gave me strength to make it easier for him. Because when I made that phone call where my daughter was telling me how uncool I was, how mean, nobody else's parents do this, I could justify it with the expectations of another adult. And it really worked. If Cassie's friend wasn't going to a party because her parents had stopped her, I wouldn't let her go to that party either. She would accept this because of her friend's parents' boundaries. I was often overwhelmed and felt guilty, as I'm sure many of us do, when harassed by a teen who feels like they're missing out, and the only person in the world that is. Having people capable of holding boundaries in areas I struggled with was a parenting lifesaver, and it really worked for me. Work out your personality type, and you'll understand what your boundary setting limits are, and if you struggle, you can look at others to help you. You know, it's all okay. We all have very different expectations, but we're all in this together as parents. I'm Kate Mason, and welcome to Parenting and Personalities. This is the podcast that connects you to the ones you care about the most. Hi, Kari. It's lovely to have you back with us again.
Hi, Kate. It's great to be back.
In our previous podcast, we discussed failure and allowing our kids and ourselves to fail, and how we can teach them to fail well is an important part of helping them develop their resilience and their grit and mindset. Today, I'm talking to Kari Sutton. Kari is a researcher and parent educator who has helped over 25,000 parents, educators, and other people who care for kids develop the skills and confidence to promote positive mental health habits in their homes, schools, and early childhood facilities. So, Kari, can you tell us, why do kids need boundaries?
Interesting question, because often when I work with parents, they want to be friends with children. And being a parent is not about being your child's friend. It's actually about being the adult. And I don't mean this in a dismissive way or a condescending way. It's actually Children need boundaries. As adults, we need boundaries. We need to know that we're in a safe pair of hands. If you think that, like going on a flight, that if we were flying on an aeroplane, if you didn't trust the pilot, you would be nervous all the time. You actually most probably wouldn't want to hop on a plane. And you'd be going, oh, I don't feel safe. Children need boundaries and need us as caring adults in their lives to set those boundaries so they feel safe. Because they need to know, what can I get away with? Children will test our boundaries. And this happens from a very early age. Like they'll push and they will find the weakest links. So they'll go, oh, if Dad's not going to give in, but I'll go talk to Mum, or oh, I know Mum's not going to bail, or not going to cave on this one, I'll go talk to Dad. Children are very good at finding the weakest link or finding the piece of armor that they can go through that hole. But boundaries are really important, because what happens is, if children don't have boundaries, they will try and create them themselves. They will try and control us as adults. They will try and make themselves feel safe. And how they do that is they want to be in control. I'm not saying it's a power game. I'm not saying that we have to be authoritarian and hard. Or what we need to actually do is set those boundaries. So if we, for example, sleep time. From a very early age, sleep is really important for all children, for all adults, for all of us, absolutely, because our brain health and things like that rely on sleep. But we also need to set those boundaries and say, okay, it's 7:00. In half an hour, you're going to go to bed. No, I'm not. I want to go to bed. Half an hour, I've given you that. We can read stories. We'll read stories, brush our teeth, but at 7:30, we're going, that's bedtime. But you've told them that and you've set those boundaries, and then you follow through. Boundaries allow a child to feel safe. Boundaries know and scaffold children's behavior, scaffold how they interact with the world. So they know that if Mum says it's at bedtime 7:30, that's going to happen. That just because they squeal and carry on, Mum's not going to move that. That's a firm boundary. It's like you can't hit your brother. So yes, I know he made you really angry, but bopping him over the head is not acceptable. That's a boundary. A boundary is not biting. I know you're cranky, but no biting. Like biting, no. So again, it's boundaries. It's setting things up to make sure because we all, as parents, we all want our children to grow into kind, empathic, caring humans.
We do.
Who can relate to people and who also have good emotional health and psychological well-being. And boundaries help them have that. If a child, and I've seen it over the years, both in school and in guidance and counselling situations, if children are not used to having boundaries, they will look for a place that will give that to them, or they will try and control it. And that's not psychologically healthy. They need to know and feel safe that these adults are a safe pair of hands. I've seen it happen at schools time and time again where they don't have a lot of boundaries at home. They come to school where there are boundaries. Their behavior spikes because they are not used to those boundaries, and so they're pushing back on them. But when those boundaries are held firm, those children know that I behave this way at home, but I need to behave this way at school. And they know that we are the safe adults. And I'm not saying that that's why, whether you be parents, teachers, carers, grandparents, it's setting those boundaries and limits, and they know that this means this adult is a safe adult. They're going to keep me safe, because that's what boundaries do. And I often say I said to Mitchell, I'm here to keep you safe. You may not like it, but that's the rules. Those are the boundaries.
Yeah, and it's true. I even had both of my teen children at different times ask me if I could ban them from going to a party. And I said, why? And they said, because I don't want to go. It's something I don't want to go to. I said, quite happy to do that. You're banned from going to the party, so get on their phone. And so it's really important for them to know that it is safe, and they creating their own boundaries.
And it may have been, my mum's such a cow.
Yes,
like, my mum's such a cow, she banned me. But and again, with the boundaries come the safety. So, for example, and I don't know if you and I have talked about it before, but having a code, so having an emoji that your kids send. So if they are in trouble, the rule with Mitchell, the rule I had was you can call me at any time, you can message me at any time when you're out. There will not be questions. Like, there may be some questions if you've stayed out later or whatever, or there's been some bad choices, but when you need me, text me an emoji. So we have an agreed emoji, and that way if other kids are looking over their shoulder, they go, oh, that's a bit odd. And I knew that if I ever got that emoji, I'd ring immediately and say, there's been a family emergency, you need to come home. I'm coming to get you.
What a great idea.
Those boundaries, because again, that allows them to set boundaries. I know in Australia, I was working with Michael Carr-Gregg. He set boundaries for his children. He's a child psychologist. And his rule was at 8:30 at night, all of their devices, so all of their phones and everything went on a table, because he knew his tween and teen boys would be getting woken up in the middle of the night by those phones. And that allowed them to say, oh, my father's such a dragon, but I have to do this because it's a rule. It's a boundary.
Yeah. Great idea.
It's things like boundaries are things like, you know what? No phones at the dinner table.
Mm-hmm.
This is, we converse. We talk to each other. Let's look at each other. It's those sorts of things where because it's teaching our children socially appropriate behavior, but also encouraging them to know this keeps me safe. So they set boundaries for themselves as well, because again, like we talked about in the previous podcast, we are the role models. So do we set boundaries? Do we set boundaries about how we allow other people to speak to us?
Hey, parenting's a tough gig. There are no rule books, just you and any well-meant advice, books that don't always hit the mark, and, well, maybe your well-meaning mother-in-law telling you what to do. No one knows your kid or you. Contact me and we'll find out how you can connect to your most important treasure. thepersonalitycoach.com.au. Yeah, it's really interesting because when my daughter was turned 18 or whatever, she actually said to me, you know what, Mum, my friends and I were, because I let her do certain things, and she said to me, it's really interesting because you let me do certain things that I never thought you would, and yet you had really tight controls around other things my friends and I thought you'd be really relaxed on. And I sat there and I said to her, it was a really interesting comment, because I said to her, well, those things were things that I actually really valued, that I kept tight around you. And the other things I thought, well, I'd actually done them myself and I knew they weren't of any danger, and I kind of just let them go. But it was interesting that she actually sat there and said, wow, you know, that was so different. I thought you'd be so much harder on different things. So like you say, they're actually quite aware of them. I don't think she would have been aware of it as a boundary as such.
No, and they don't call them boundaries, but they're aware of them. And that's the thing, because what we are modeling as adults when we do this, we're modeling how they can keep themselves safe. And again, and I know we've talked about it before, but and there's a hand model for the brain. There's a prefrontal cortex, but right at the back of the brain, that's where our procedural memory is. So when we as adults and as parents and as carers set these things up, what that happens is that's stored for the child in the procedural. Like, they actually go, okay, well, this is how I keep myself safe. They won't call it a boundary, but they'll say, so can I riding your skateboard or riding those electronic scooters now? We ride on the footpath, but my friends ride on the road without a helmet. No. If I catch you, on that without a helmet or whatever, like that's not going to happen. Like it will be taken or whatever it is, like the consequence, again, a natural consequence of what happens. But the boundaries are there. And that's like your daughter said, she remembers that.
Yes.
And that's what she's going to take forward into her role as a parent. If she ever parents, she's going to go, you know what? That's how I was parented. She may not consciously do it, but I know, and I'd raise my hand and be the first one. I've opened my mouth sometimes and my mother's come out, which is highly embarrassing. And you just go, oh,
put it back.
That's right. But I want to go down that path. But that's what happens. And so we really need to be aware of what are the healthy boundaries we're setting. And boundaries don't have to be strict and stringent and so they can't move. And that's part of, I know we talked about before, but that wrapping kids in cotton wool or protecting them all the time, boundaries are what they need to keep them safe. So we go to bed at a certain hour. We brush out, there's some routines, some rituals, some things we do. We talk at the dinner table. We do not text each other or sit on the phone. That boundaries are, you're going to help clean up. Like if you live in this house, you're going to help keep it tidy.
Yeah.
And that's, again, it's about, and no, I'm going to say at times, no, you cannot go out till 2:00 in the morning.
And they are, yeah.
I'm going to say no, that you cannot have these XYZ. Sometimes, and it comes down to it, sometimes people, and this is now, are saying, no, you cannot have a phone until you're this age. But my friends all have one. I understand that. However, right now, or if they do give them, it's going to be you only have these apps. That's the boundary. That's the rule.
And that's a very wise rule these days, honestly. And my children are, like I say, older, and they look at kids now, even the 18-year-olds, and they go, oh my goodness, we're so lucky. We only had MySpace. We only had whatever back when we were young, and so they're seeing all of those issues around boundaries, around phones and everything as well. They're sitting there going, they recognize it. And
I think that's a really important point, Kate, because there are no absolutes. We grew up with different boundaries than what kids will grow up to these days. As I said to you before, we went home and could shut the door. Social media now is all pervasive. So there may need to be different boundaries. There are no absolutes, but there's rule, like there are boundaries where you will keep them safe, and there are things where you go, this is what's going to happen. But what you actually do is make sure that they know that they do not cross that line.
Yes. And I was speaking in one of my stories about boundaries, and I have some people are very strong on boundaries and others aren't. Mm-hmm. And I use people to help me keep a strong boundary because I can be a bit too flexible sometimes. But also sometimes the stronger people hold their boundaries too tightly. I found growing up, I had all my daughter's friends around and I heard all the stories. And the parents that were the most too firm and too rigid in their boundaries were the ones whose kids slipped out at night, drank without them knowing, did all of that type of thing. So sometimes it's good to have boundaries, but it's good to be a bit flexible around those boundaries as well, isn't it?
Oh, you have, and I guess I look at it, and so again, no absolutes. It's about having communication. It's about having and knowing that I don't want you to be Stalin or to be a dictator. It's actually saying these are the boundaries we have. So yeah, no, you're not going to swear at your mother, or you're not going to throw things, or you're not going to hurt. Like there are some absolutes where no bashing, no hurting, no swear, or whatever it is for your family. However, there are other things where you go, you know what? Let's talk about that. We might be like, let's negotiate. And this is for older children.
No.
Young children can't really negotiate. They need the firm boundaries and the knowledge that mum and dad, or mum and mum, or dad and dad, that they're going to keep me safe.
That's right.
So that my secure, safe adults are going to keep me safe. And that's what the boundaries are there for. But as they get older, let's talk about that. If you can show me you're responsible and that you can make good choices, yeah, we can look at those things. And we can do that. It's just making sure that that line of communication is always open, that is strong, and that you trust them and say to you, I trust you. I trust you to do the right thing.
I did that to my kids and they said that was the worst thing that I could ever say to them. And I said, why? And they said, I felt so under pressure. Because I'd just say, they'd go out at night, 15, 16. And I did say to my daughter, look, if you're going to drink, I want to know about it. But let me tell you, it's really bad for you. You're underage and it's, I don't approve. And I said, but I trust you. And she go, no, don't tell me you trust me. Yes, I do. And it actually is a really effective word.
Yes, because it is, because Kate, again, our kids do not want to disappoint us. They do not. If you think back, and some of even the most vivid feelings I recall would be when I disappointed my family or feel that I've disappointed somebody that I care about. So us trusting them and having that really strong connection with them. So it's like I often say, and I do this when I am illustrating with families about how a neuron fires together, wires together, and how it gets stronger. And it's like passing a piece of string or cotton between the two of us. And that relationship where you trust them, where it's safe, where those things happen, the more you pass, the thicker that cord gets. And hopefully building up from childhood, from early childhood all the way through to teenage years, that bond is really strong. That's a really thick cord of trust, of connection, of belonging. And that's when you can say to them, and it's not about making them feel bad. It's actually just saying, I trust you.
It is.
Because if I've trusted Mitchell, or if you've trusted your daughter, and then that trust is broken, that's a whole other conversation. You say, actually, you broke my trust. I consider that you were responsible. Now we need to have an adjustment of these boundaries, or we need to look at what's going on. So it's that sort of flexibility and negotiation and the ability to have that conversation because you've got that relationship, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And it's all about communication. Ultimately, it's just all about communication, isn't it? If we can talk to our kids and we can discuss things with them and find out where things are coming from, that's just the best thing. So if I'm sitting there and I haven't got any boundaries in place, where do I start?
Somewhere small. Seriously, start with something that you feel you can hold the line on. Because if it's a boundary and you're going to, it may be, for example, if a young person, now this is a teenager, if they're swearing at you, you'll need to hold, and for me, that as a teacher, I let it roll off my back. Like there are some children, but as a parent in a parent role, that ain't going to cut it with me. So that was something I would not actually wear and Mitchell knew that. So he might swear in frustration. He might swear when he kicks his toe or things like that, but never at me. If you have a child who does that, you may have to say, look, actually, I do not like that. And it's not going to happen. And then what do you do? So be willing to put consequences in place as well. So if you've got, and again, going back to our previous time when we caught up on the podcast, we talked about responsibility. So having boundaries means that we're responsible for looking at, if this is the boundary we're going to set, we need to know what the consequence is going to be if they go past that. Or if that you just wait them out. I've had situations where I just wait. Mitchell, that's going to happen. I can wait. Yep, I can wait.
Yep.
And standing firm. So that's why I said start with something small and stand firm and hold that boundary.
That's great advice because it is really true. If I think back, I'm a person that says let's wait and see. And my kids always know that, but I know that if I put in a strong boundary around something and circumstances change, my daughter would be going out 1 minute, then it would be cancelled. And if I'd said to her, no, you can't go out for the first one, then it got cancelled. Then she would try me with another one. And then, I'll be up and down. So in the end, I just would go, let's wait and see. And by the time the final outcome arrived, I could put a boundary around it. So sometimes it was a good thing to do what you're saying in that sense. So it is really important.
Very important.
Thank you. Once again, the best. Love listening to your vast experience and your knowledge and your ideas. You've shared so much for our listeners today. I'm sure that they're all going to take action, or they're going to go and onto your website maybe and grab your book and see what other things are out there.
Even if it's just one thing, Kate, I guess that's the thing. One thing, just start small. Please don't beat yourselves up if things aren't going that way. If you haven't got those at the moment, choose one thing. Just do one thing. And start with that. And that's what I want to say to people. Look, you haven't screwed up. You love your kids. That's why you're listening to this podcast about parenting personalities, and you understand more about that. So just choose one thing. But it's always an absolute pleasure to be with you and speak with you, Kate, and to serve your listeners. So thank you.
We're all unique parents, but our personality type and temperament may influence many of our parenting decisions and affect how we parent. Lean into your strengths and look at other people's strengths and use them too. For example, your partner, a family member, or a friend. We will all make mistakes, but if our children feel loved, secure, and cared for, they're usually forgiving. If not forgetting, they will also feel safe in the knowledge that they too can make mistakes in a relationship which has firm but flexible boundaries. Do your children have a chance to explore and know that there's a safe landing place for them when they return? Start believing in your kids, because who else is going to? Give praise for the right things, such as effort, behaviour and kindness. Encourage open communication and mutual respect, as this can help us all understand and respect each other's boundaries. I'm Kate Mason. Thank you for listening to Parenting and Personalities. If you've enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could leave a rating and a review that would help others learn about the podcast. If you're interested in discovering more about you and your family's personality types, you'll find my book, Who is This Monster or Treasure in My House, on Booktopia or Amazon. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Stories and Strategies. Please recommend this podcast to just one friend, and we'll see you next time.